Marcoh, or the Big Chad as Marina calls him, is the fourth player character we'll be talking about today. Marcoh's childhood was rough. He recalls having parents, until one day he didn't, implying that something bad happened to them, or even that they maybe abandoned Marcoh when he was too young to understand what was going on. In any case, Marcoh is left alone in the world. He has a sister, but it seems that she was a younger one, that Marcoh was ultimately responsible for raising. The pair grew up on the streets of the Vatican, a city that is both the centre of the religion of Ulmer and a crime-filled, poverty-stricken nightmare. At the age of 10, Marcoh tried working, doing little odd jobs, but would always get fired for incompetence on account of him being 10. It's likely that he also pursued crime, like pickpocketing and burglary, but these trades never stuck. He desired to live an honest life, even if it was simple, and would be roughed up pretty regularly, until one day he realised he was an absolute unit. Marcoh would quickly start winning street fights more often than he was losing, and gangs would approach the young man looking to recruit him. He was always a pretty good fighter, possessing a raw natural talent, and instead of joining any of these gangs, he turned that talent towards pursuing fighting professionally, rather than falling into crime. Marcoh would start fighting in underground unofficial leagues. At the same time as his career was blooming, his sister had become a woman, and a new man would enter the scene, a gangster, Ricardo. That same gangster would hook up with Marcoh's sister, and it seemed innocent enough at first. The reality of Vatican City is that corruption and crime are everywhere, so Marcoh's sister dating a mobster wouldn't be the end of the world, and it's not like there's a lot of options. Besides, he seems nice. Ricardo is the heir to the Ricardo branch of the organised crime group simply called The Family, which seems to be a coalition between a number of crime families, who all work together, while still being rivals to some extent. Ricardo at first seems to be a stand-up guy, even offering Marcoh a job in his organisation, and while Marcoh rejects this offer, Ricardo instead offers Marcoh some real boxing training, hooking him up with a better coach that could harness and sharpen Marcoh's natural boxing ability, which he only accepted because his sister convinced him to. Marcoh would train hard and start having real fights, which he won, and he'd keep winning, with Ricardo maintaining a kind of benefactor role to Marcoh, until one day Marcoh had a fight with a man that Ricardo had a particular interest in. The man was once a member of the family, and had left the organisation, severing all ties, and Ricardo had a simple request for Marcoh after all he had done for the boxer: kill him. Marcoh's opponent was once a member of the family who left. Obviously the circumstances around that weren't amicable, and this is the family's way of getting back at him, or at least it seems that way. Marcoh was shocked at this turn of events, and when he declined, Ricardo activated his trap card. He had Marcoh's sister, and he made a very clear threat. Marcoh kills a man in the ring, or bad things happen to her. Marcoh complied, killing the man. This event would define the rest of his life, his guilt for the act. He beat him to death in the ring, a nasty way to go to be sure. Marcoh knew that this wouldn't be Ricardo's last job for him, and he didn't want to live his life as a blunt instrument. He planned to skip town with his sister. He searched for her, but was unable to find her at her apartment, so instead he decides to confront his boss, for lack of a better word. Ricardo had made it a point to avoid Marcoh since the fight, likely realising that the big guy wanted to absolutely eviscerate him. Marcoh met the man in a club and immediately attacked Ricardo, throwing him from a balcony 2 stories high. The mobster landed head first on the club's dance floor, ultimately killing him, immediately making Marcoh Fear and Hunger's most based character. Marcoh flees the scene and calls his sister, somehow fighting through Ricardo's goons. The two agree to flee and meet back up in Rondon, but given that he had just thrown his former boss from a window, Marcoh didn't have the luxury of planning a trip. He jumped on the first train leaving the Vatican, which just happened to be heading towards Preheville. His participation in the festival then is an unfortunate cosmic coincidence. Of the player characters, he's the only one who didn't actually mean to be in Preheville, but ironically he's one of the most prepared to deal with its horrors, in a physical sense. Marcoh possesses the Tainted Soul, something he shares with the new god, the Tainted One. Our first interaction with Marcoh is outside of the train on the morning of day 1. He's actually there during the train discussion, but is standing outside a frame. He doesn't have a lot to say, standing against the train with his arms folded. His entire first day is spent there, with Olivia and Marina. When we do try and talk to him, he seems aloof, giving us one-word answers. We don't really get a good idea of who he is, until we recruit him, and over the course of a few conversations, we get an idea of what his life was like, and what his perspective on the world is. In the Old Town, he says this: "The Vatican City is similar slums. I feel like with the war, they just became more common as we moved forward." Marcoh never fought in the war, but is still deeply affected by it. The Great War left a scar on the psyche of the world, and we see this in all of the characters, with Marcoh nearly getting himself killed by Pav after he attacks him for wearing a Bremen uniform. Marcoh is surprisingly more perceptive than the other party members give him credit for, and he's constantly cognizant of danger. I realised just now, there aren't many small critters around. Where are all the birds and such? This perception likely comes from Marcoh's hard childhood. He had to be aware of his surroundings at all times. Marcoh, though, isn't just some on-the-edge thug. He considers himself something of a noble warrior, and respects people who push through adversity. Running can be good exercise, but you can never run fast enough to escape your troubles and sadness. That's why I picked up boxing. You can face your adversaries head-on. Marcoh is a protector figure for the other characters, and his sister, neglecting his own needs and wants in the process. And he always tries to maintain a high morale, even in dire situations. There has to be a way up. Don't give up just yet. Marcoh has quiet determination in his voice. But for some reason, you don't feel as hopeful. The reason we don't feel so hopeful is because we've just jumped into the toilet with no escape. But still, Marcoh's burning warrior spirit remains. The character Marcoh interacts with the most as a party member is Olivia, acting as a protector and big brother figure to the young woman, possibly viewing her as a substitute little sister, given his real one is likely waiting for him in Rondon. Olivia says, "I really don't like this city, whether we're indoors or on the streets. It never feels safe. I'll never leave the countryside once we get out of here. We are getting out of here, right?" And Marcoh says, "We'll get out. Don't worry. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep." Marcoh is hyper-protective of Olivia, not leaving her alone without a wheelchair on day 1, and venturing into Preheville to retrieve a chair for her on day 2, which will run him afoul of Pav, if Pav is still alive at this point. The player will enter the city to find the two in a stare-down. If Tanaka is alive, he'll be accompanying Marcoh. Up to now, both Marcoh and Pav have been distant from the player, with Pav outright making a joke about killing us at some point. If we don't intervene, Pav will shoot both men. And if we try talking, Pav will also shoot them, likely not wanting to run the risk of his confrontation turning into a 3-on-1 affair. The only way to save Marcoh and Tanaka is to kill Pav here, though talking to Marcoh afterwards, he'll tell us that he attacked Pav for being a Bremen soldier, so Pav was kind of acting in self-defense. Marcoh will return to the train with Olivia's chair, and from this point both characters are available to recruit. If Tanaka is alive, we'll find Marcoh teaching him the basics of boxing. Marcoh is something of an older brother figure to both characters, protecting Olivia and training Tanaka. At several points, he'll also act as a protective figure to the player, offering to take our hand on the rafters if we need to, or offering to take the lead at several points without Preheville, willing to confront the horrors of the city's streets to buy us time. Though behind this protective nature is a dark miasma that rests heavily on Marcoh's soul, not the sword, just to be clear. In the schoolyard we find the gallows, and if we're able to read Marcoh's mind, we'll hear this. Marcoh is lost in his thoughts while looking intensely at the gallows. You read his mind. Something always comes to remind me of what I've done. There's no escaping it, is there? And if Dawn's around, he'll say this. Don't look too intensely, just so you don't get any ideas. Huh? What? You were really staring at that thing. Oh, don't worry. My mind is as sharp as ever. Good, just checking up on everyone. Marcoh's thoughts will continue to haunt him throughout Preheville, until finally they become too much. On the morning of day 3, Marcoh will moonscorch. If he hasn't been recruited by the player up to this point, we'll find him in the Mold Apartments, which is a location unlike anywhere else in Preheville. The building has a rare portal, which can be found in one of the basement's washing machines. The place is filled with a kind of moonscorch called neighbours, big hulking monsters that have anteater-like faces. They aren't an uncommon sight, nor a particularly tough enemy to deal with, but then we see an odd one. It's bigger than the others, bulkier. In fact, it's picking something up and throwing them at us. And this one is a challenge, boasting a tough exterior and multiple attacks per turn. We escape from it and find the fellatio effigy, which we'll need to access the church's secret tunnel. Also in the room we'll find Tanaka, if he's still alive, now wearing his tie like a bandana. We can talk to Tanaka here, who will tell us that the creature is Marcoh, who succumbed to the pressure of the festival, and his own internal guilt, becoming the Giant. Tanaka will vow to avenge Marcoh by killing the man in the dreams, and winning Termina. Tanaka will be far more dangerous in combat from this point, so clearly Marcoh's training was paying off. Confronting the Giant, the beast will only have one answer for anything we ask: guilt. The Giant is a clear manifestation of Marcoh's guilt, taking on the form of a huge blunt instrument, who literally throws lives away as he tries to kill us. Killing him, we get his tainted soul, giving us access to his talents, which are some of the best in the game, with barehanded efficiency, counterstance, bob and weave, and fast attack, being must-have skills for most playthroughs. Which means, sorry Marcoh, Dawn doesn't have much to offer on Marcoh's new form, simply calling it a mess. Visually it resembles the neighbours, that are also predominantly found in the mold apartments and Rare's realm, although the Giant is a lot more dangerous than them, being that its head doesn't appear till the second turn, and it's got a higher HP pool. On top of that, it has multiple attacks per turn. Upon killing it, you can't help but feel sorry for the misunderstood boxer. Miro has stated that Marcoh is mostly inspired by Rocky, and we certainly see the outlines in there, in that he's a naturally gifted fighter with the heart of gold, forced to participate in morally questionable behaviour to make ends meet, with Rocky being a debt collector for the mob, and Marcoh beating someone to death in the ring. At first, Marcoh comes across like an aloof arsehole, arms folded, head down, acting like he's too cool to be there. But the reality is that Marcoh is actually a fairly shy guy, and he's constantly haunted by the ghosts of his past, and his guilt, that came from a life he never asked for, follows him throughout Preheville. If we talk to Marcoh about what he would want to do should he survive the city, he says this: "When we're done here, honestly, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Maybe I'm ready to retire. I've seen enough for one lifetime. Maybe I really can retire. It's time I take the next step in life. Maybe I'll start coaching the kids at the gym. That could work." We also get an insight into what Marcoh wants when we all go to the abandoned shack. "I wouldn't mind growing old in a house like this, sitting on the porch in the evening, maybe sharing that with someone. Never mind, we've got more pressing matters." And should he escape Preheville, he'll actually start that gym. First he continues his trip to Rondon, where he meets up with his sister, though the horrors of Preheville stay with him, leaving him unable to sleep. Marcoh decides to open a boxing gym, intending to teach people how to defend themselves, not just against common criminals or braggadocious drunkards, but against the darkness that hides in the shadows of the world. Over time, teaching young adults and kids how to fight even starts to alleviate the guilt he felt before entering Preheville. He can't bring back the life he took, but he can give people the tools to protect their own, and in that, Marcoh is able to find some peace. But maybe that's not how Marcoh's story really ends. Marcoh has a strong bond with Livia and Tanaka, and the fates of those characters leads to the Museum of Preheville, and maybe Marcoh's fate is to also end his journey there. But in an odd turn of events, when Marcoh jumped on the train to Preheville, another mafioso boarded at the same time. Imagine, if you will, if Marcoh had all of his combat ability, but no morality, no compassion, and nothing to do but bash in heads. You don't need to imagine it. His name is Caligura, and he's the only character in Preheville who might be more evil than Father Donovan, and you'll find out why next time.